Blessings. Thank you for joining me once again in studying God's Word. As we continue in our study of the book of Esther, we're going to be looking at the topic of standing firm in this series that we've entitled For Such a Time as This. Now, our text passage is going to come out of Esther chapter 2, verses 19 and 20. And I want you to join me as we look at this passage together. Beginning with verse 19 of chapter 2 of Esther, it says, "When the young women were assembled together for a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Esther still had not revealed her birthplace or her ethnic background, as Mordecai had directed. She obeyed Mordecai's orders as she always had while he raised her." Now, it's interesting. A study was conducted in 2019 with the intent of determining the status of those considered 20-somethings and their ongoing church attendance. Now, an important aspect of this study was that it focused upon those who had been raised in church and then whether they remained in church following their departure from their teen years, moving into their 20s. The study concluded that 64% had walked away. Now, the Barna Group came along and they released a book that entails an examination of those who chose to stay. It was found that one of the major characteristics of what they referred to as resilient disciples was their cultural discernment. What this means is that they had adopted the ability to apply God's word to an accelerated and complex culture. Now, we see this characteristic in the life of Esther as well. She was certainly a resilient disciple as she was taken out of her Hebrew home and culture, and she was thrust into the very pagan Persian culture. Now, as we look at verses 19 and 20, we begin to learn more about each of the main characters. First, we learn that Mordecai had risen to a prominent position. In fact, he was now sitting at the king's gate, and here is where matters of the law were settled. While these may appear to be seemingly minutely small details, they reveal that God is working in preparation for what is yet to come. No doubt God had purposely positioned Mordecai there to further his work. Now, secondly, we learned that Esther continued following Mordecai's instructions to keep her Jewish identity a secret. She continued in obedience to Mordecai just as she had always done as a child. Now, in the Septuagint, which is the earliest Greek translation of the Hebrew text, Esther is described as obedient, not only to Mordecai and his instruction, but also to God and to God's word and instruction. In other words, what we see in these two verses is that Esther remained firm. She stood firm on the beliefs and the values that had been ingrained in her as a child. She had learned how to best apply those truths, the truths of God's word, to this complex culture that she now found herself in. It should be noted that even as she served as queen and began to experience the added pressure of that position, that she continued remaining faithful and standing firm. Now, both Esther and Mordecai would continue to discover that standing firm is never going to be easy. Their resolution to follow God was going to take added faith and added courage. Listen to me, as you go through each day, you're going to find yourself being tempted to adapt to the culture that is around you. You're going to be challenged to do things and to say things that you know are not a part of what being a true disciple of Jesus is all about. Folks, life is tough even on a good day, but it's going to continue to get tougher as our culture continues to spin out of control. I challenge you today to commit yourself to standing firm, regardless of the societal pressures all around you. Until next time.